So we are here at the Richmond Tattoo Festival in 2019 with Gunnar. Gunnar, thank you for taking the time to sit down and talk with us.
Oh, thank you.
Gunnar, can you tell everybody where you work and what city and shop you work at?
I'm currently at Greystone Tattoo in Gahanna, Ohio, and I just moved back out there about 3 months ago or something.
How close is Gahanna, Ohio to Columbus?
Gahanna is right outside. It's the suburb. It's like a suburb right outside Columbus. So Columbus is like within the Beltway, and Gahanna's right outside the Beltway.
Who do you work with there?
Currently, I work with a young lady named Natalie. I wish I had everybody's Instagram, but it's Natalie, Nicole, Richard Cook, and Mika, who's the first-year tattoo artist.
So you've
been... and Andala, who's another female artist. It's a primarily female shop, which is pretty neat.
I thought it was just you and Rich.
Nope. So
it's good to see that there's multiple people there.
Yeah, it's 6 people total. 4 young ladies, and then Richard and I.
Nice.
So, yeah.
So you've been around the tattoo industry for a very long time.
25 years or so.
Can you give me a quick recap of your tattoo career?
I started in Connecticut, served 2 apprenticeships, sort of, before starting my professional career. I always say it was around 1997, because I kind of consider like the stumbling part of the first year of tattooing, the learning process still. And then after a few years, I moved out to Columbus, where I ended up working at Stain Skin with Derb Morrison, who does like Hell City and True Tubes and whatnot. And then opened up my own shop called Gods and Monsters with Hoffa and a guy named Tom Cinnamon. And then did the Newfound Glory art stuff, and then moved out to California, and then worked out in California at a couple different shops, Tattoo Revolution out in Redlands at the time, and Guru Tattoo in San Diego, and then another shop called Red Door, and then moved back to Ohio for a bit, and then I opened up my second studio out in Lancaster, Ohio, which was more like a gallery and art studio, where I was like tattooing, painting, and then teaching art classes. And then sold everything I owned, moved into a Jeep, drove around the country for a few months, ended up in California for a couple months, then moved out to Boston, and then from Boston to Ohio. So I've kind of been all over the place the last 25 years.
So why do you keep going between Ohio, Southern California, and Boston?
So I grew up in Connecticut. That's where my family all lives. I ended up in Boston because I had a friend who was kind of getting a project going out there and asked me if I would agree to come help him for a little bit. So I went out there to help him. And of course he was helping me because I was kind of refooting after my travels across the country. And then my kids live in Ohio. And then I just fell in love with Southern California when I was younger, when I was really into the pop punk scene and whatnot. And so I went out there to be closer. I got offered, after doing the art for that Newfound Glory thing, I had gotten offered a toy contract with a company out there that didn't end up panning out, but I had went out there to kind of pursue that. And then I moved back to Ohio to be closer to my kids again, because it sucked being away from them. And then after they grew up, I thought I'd go back out to California and live back out there, but I had changed too much, and it wasn't like as fun as I remembered it being. I was too old. I was like older and more into not being where everything is so busy and so fast paced. So
you went from living in Lancaster to LA, which I'm sure was
Yeah, and for those that don't know, like Lancaster, Ohio, outside of its well-known, it's known for General Sherman, who's like a famous Civil War general, was born there, and a bunch of, It's a kind of a rural town in Ohio, so it's not a big population, and it's kind of out in the country. And then I spent that, like, the few months, like 3 months, living out of my Jeep and doing that cross country journey, which where I spent, at that point I'd spent 3 months by myself, like practically alone every day, and in nature and in the woods. So when I got to California, like, I was hypersensitive to sound and people. Like, everything seemed weird and fake to me. It was a really strange, like, surreal experience. Like, I would show up to work and be like almost shell shocked from, like, the noise and the fast pace of everything. So it was almost the worst thing I could do, because I had gone from, like, this, like, peace and serenity to, like, things moving much faster, and everything kind of bothered me, like loud music, like lots of people, like crowds and stuff. Like, I was really hypersensitive to that. So I ended up leaving California, and then was heading back. I was going to try and find a job in Colorado, and so I was just driving, looking for work out in Colorado, and that was kind of hard to find places to live, and I had exhausted my funds at this point. Like, I wasn't really working a lot in California, so I was quickly, like, going through what little money I had, and then I had gotten an offer to move out to Boston to help, like, a shop that was expanding. They were shy some artists, so I went out there and took that position to kind of help them during that transition. And then it wasn't like a place I had set out to kind of live. It was kind of just a transitional period. And then as soon as I had a chance, I went back to Ohio to be back in Ohio.
So you traveled across America in 2016, as you were just talking about.
Yeah.
I don't want you to give away your favorite spots, but what were some of your favorite spots in America?
I really fell in love with the Rockies. Like, I did not want to leave the Rockies because of how diverse it was. So that was like basically I was trying to find, like, where I wanted to live next, because now I'm getting older, and I really am, like, trying to figure out where I want to settle down once my kids are, married and doing their lives, or whatever they're doing, whether it's not married, but, growing up when they're adults. So I was trying to find, like, where my next place in life would be, because I'm not from Ohio. I only had my kids there, so I don't have, like, a lot of, like, attachment to it outside of my children. And then so I fell in love with the Rockies a lot. I really enjoyed that, because I just like the diversity that I could be, like, in what looked like the desert one minute, and then up in the mountains the next minute, and in these green meadows, and you're still kind of close enough to population. But with the the legalization boom, like, it is like you might as well move to California. Yep. It's so crowded out in those areas now that it wasn't, and the cost of living is, like, crazy, and housing was, like, way more difficult than you would think, because everybody, like, turned stuff into Airbnbs. It seemed like there was no, like, rental properties. It was like everything was an Airbnb now. But I liked it a lot out there. Like, I really enjoyed that, and Utah was really enjoyable, because I went out to Moab and out to the desert area, and then I love Olympic National Forest up in Washington. I mean, you could have, like, seven different ecosystems up there. So you can be in the jungle. Like, it's the only natural rainforest in America is up there, in North America, yeah. So they have, like, on one side's like a rainforest, and then you can drive, like, to the other side of the mountain and have a whole different, like, experience, and it's like a 20-minute drive. And so I got to camp out on the beach up there. I got to camp up in the mountains, like, so I got to, like, do a lot of stuff. And the way I was kind of doing it, like, I didn't have, like, a lot of money, or so I was, and I just, if it didn't fit in my Jeep, it didn't come, so I didn't have much. I had, like, a hammock I had set up in my Jeep, and I would just sleep in the like, I would pull off the side of the road and I'd sleep in my hammock, and then I would, like, I got a national park pass, and I would kind of pull into the national, into a park, and I'd, find like a place I could pull off, like in the Jeep, and I'd sleep in the Jeep, and then I would, like get up, I'd hike in the morning, and then after I got done hiking, I was eating like a lot of like tuna packets, and I wasn't eating a lot, but I was like, I was getting by, and then I'd shower in the river, or like I would just like jump in in a river or get under a waterfall, and then I'd get back in my car and I'd drive to the next spot, hike a new spot, camp out for the night, wake up in the morning. So I was like constantly in the go. So I saw more of like America, I think, in 3 months than most people could see.
Sounds like it.
And I started my journey in Connecticut. So I actually had driven from Ohio to Connecticut, and then all the way back to the Rockies, then through Utah, up to Idaho, over to Washington, down through Oregon, down through Northern California. Then I went and worked in LA because I had like 3 months to kill because I had closed my business and my lease had come up on my business, and so that was a good time to get out. And then the job offer was available in August, so I had this gap of 3 months, and I'm like, what am I going to do for 3 months? And so then I was like, fuck it, I'll live in my car and see the country. And it was crazy because it actually cost me less to do that than a normal month's worth of bills, expenses was.
Yeah, because you weren't sleeping in hotels or anything.
Because I wasn't staying in hotels, and I just went and shopped at like grocery stores and bought cheap food and on-the-go food. And I really I tried to figure out how I could do it for the least amount, because the idea was I was trying to like learn to be a minimalist at the time. So I had sold or donated everything I owned, I dumped everything, and I wanted to become a minimalist because I had this idea. I was on like this spiritual search, and so I had this idea that like if I did it as a pilgrimage, the idea is ideally you do it with nothing. Like I should have been barefoot walking across the country essentially, but I still had a future and life I needed to create. So I did it with very little, and then I had minimal food, and then people would offer me help. So I was having like people would buy me, like I had the Ted Marks up in, sorry Ted if you didn't want people to know, but he got me a hotel room. Like he didn't even know me. He just had been following my journey on Instagram, and him and his wife were like nice enough to put me up in a room so I could get a bed for the night, because they were like, you've been on the road this long, you could. Yeah, it was super nice. And then I got they didn't know, they just were like, hey man, just check in, it's there waiting for you. And I rolled into town, and so thank you for that again. But they if they watch this, but there were people would just give me, like they would let me stay at their house or whatever, and we would have dinner, and it was like with strangers, like I would put a call out on Instagram, like I'll be here if you want to meet up and say hi, and then people, I'd meet with people and get a beer or something and meet strangers, and that was part of the journey experience I wanted. Like my idea of a pilgrimage is, you go with very little, and you have to humble yourself. So I had been like in a place where my career and ego had been out of control for so long. I was trying to like learn humility, and part of humility is like not having anything and having to ask for help along the way. And I was doing it willfully, so it's a little different than someone who has to go, like that loses everything and has to like really beg for help, like so it's not, like I feel like they're really, far more humbled than I ever could have been through the experience. But the idea was to like, if people offered you help, you accept it, because it's hard for people. Like many of us never ask for help. Like a lot of people will never ask for help. We're so like, our egos are so driven that we're afraid to be like, hey man, like I'm in a hard place right now, or I'm in a hard time. And I know personally I've done that where I thought I could get through moments, whether it's like emotionally or monetarily, and I won't even ask my family to like help me. Nobody knows anything's wrong, and I know people who do that stuff all the time. So this was a big learning experience for me to do that. So that was the whole point of the journey, like for that, was to do that. And then when I got to California, I figured I'd get back on my feet and reboot everything. But when I got out there, I just was so changed by my experience and where I had come from that it didn't fit. And I stuck it out for about 3 months and then kind of knew instantly I didn't want to be there. And I'd kind of known early on that I didn't want to be there, but I was hoping it was going to get better once I got through the shell shock of the my alter, like how different I'd become. And it's hard because I'd moved to like Calabasas area. So here I am, I'm a minimalist. At this point, I own like a knapsack of clothing. I don't own anything. And it's a place that is like all materialistic. So it's like, what kind of car do you drive? And, like, where do you live? And what shoes you wear all matter. And I'm all, like, dude, I got, like, even still, I own like 7 t-shirts and 2 pairs of pants, and that's my wardrobe. Like, I've like learned to like live with nothing because I don't know, it just feels like it doesn't bother me at all. Like for some people it like freaks them out, and I'm like, once you kind of get used to it, it's not like a big deal. My clothes are clean. I own a washer dryer. My clothes are clean. I just like that I'm not like it doesn't rule my life anymore. So now instead of taking that money to go buy like the fanciest whatever's next, I'm like, I'm just going to invest this and start to build my future there or whatever, like the money goes different. So I just learned how to learn, like I lived way different than most people I know now. And I don't know, it's interesting for me because sometimes I'm like, man, I don't know how to relate to you. Like, but I don't know. I think it was something I needed to go through. So
this was in 17, not 16.
It would have been 2000. Yeah, 2000. I mean, it's still kind of going because it started about May 2017 is when I think when I closed the shop.
Because I was out in Colorado, and I remember that you were passing through Colorado, and I tried to meet up with you, but we were just too far apart. I was in Denver for a couple of days. Oh. And you were just about 3 hours south, I think. But,
I might have gone down to like Durango or something at that point.
So when you moved out of LA back to Boston, did you do the same sort of journey?
I did a much shorter version. So I had some friends who were having, it was Thanksgiving time when I left. So I stayed till about November-ish, October, November. I started in Southern California, and then this time I didn't get to see the Grand Canyon. So this time I went through the Grand Canyon and camped out there and then came up. I had friends who were having Thanksgiving in Breckenridge, so I went and stayed with them for Thanksgiving, and then from there I kind of shot out to Connecticut, and then the studio was supposed to be ready to roll by January, and they ended up having some building issues where they were waiting on codes and permit stuff to get everything. I was supposed to start working in January, and I don't think I actually started working again till like February. So I had stayed with my family and stuff while I waited for things to get kind of put back in place. And then, then I was there in March, and then I just moved back out. I moved out here in May, back out to Ohio, I think in May.
So you've tattooed on the West Coast, East Coast, and Midwest. Do you notice any difference in the cultures between the tattoo culture between the 3 areas? I know a lot of people think the Midwest is a lot slower, is a lot more slower paced life than the East Coast and West Coast.
I think if you would have asked me this question like 15 years ago or 10 years ago maybe, there was a time, like when I started in Connecticut, and then I went to, like I went from Connecticut to Columbus. Like Columbus had a pretty good tattoo scene. I mean, it's a really there's a lot of great artists that have come through Connecticut historically. So Columbus had a very strong tattoo scene. And they had people were pretty good collectors in Columbus. I mean, if you went rural, it wasn't the same, but if you stayed in the city, it was pretty good. And it was always funny because people think Columbus was the country, so they didn't, when I went to California, they were like, oh man, would you just come from cow country? And I'm like, well, it's like a city, it's it's a college town, so it's pretty youthful there. And but over the years, Columbus has gotten vastly bigger. But then when I went to California was a real tattoo mecca comparatively to the East Coast or to, I mean, it was everybody out there was tattooed when I had gotten out there, 12, 15 years ago. Then when the TV and social media hit, it's everywhere's the same. When you travel now, outside of rural stuff, every place seems the same to me now. Like, it's so, like, everything's kind of gentrified to some degree, and it feels like everything is like even coming here, like being in Richmond, I'm like, they're like, what's Ohio like? And I'm like, Columbus is just like this. Like, it's just like Richmond.
Yep.
It's the same, like, microbreweries, and it's the same Chipotle, and it's the same, you know, Applebee's or whatever, like, chain restaurant. Like, we have all the same stuff. It's all the same thing. All the cult, like, all the kid, like, a hipster's a hipster no matter where you go. And it's weird, even like when I get online now and I look at like other countries. I was just commenting about this recently because I look at like the shop setups, like in whether it's like Europe or Russia or South America now. And as America, I always thought we were so different, you know, than all these other countries. But when I look at tattoo studios or tattooer, I can't tell where people are from now. The studio looks exactly the same as the studios I work in here. Like, it might as well just be right down the road, and it could be like in, you know, a whole different country now. And I'm like, man, everything kind of is starting to look the same to me. Like, I'm not traveling as much, like, globally as much as I do the United States. But every time I go, like, to me, it's like San Antonio or Austin, or, you know, like, it's not much different than Columbus or, you know, Cincinnati or Hartford, Connecticut, or Quincy, Massachusetts. You know, it's like they all kind of seem the same. They all kind of are like, the people change a little, the accents change a little, but all in all, it's almost like, unless you're getting out into the rural, most of the stuff's pretty similar now. So, and tattoo culture is so hip everywhere now. Like, Columbus is heavily tattooed now. Like, so I think you used to be able to, like, they used to stand out, but now I don't see that. Even, you know, like
social media,
I think, balanced everything. It kind of like, you know, it's like people used to look at the Midwest like it was ignorant, and, you know, like, oh, they're so much more backwards than the coastlines. And I'm like, they're not at all. Like, they're really, it's all this, you know, like, maybe rural areas tend to not get stuff as fast, but for the most part, people are the same. Like, even Lancaster, like, now, dude, that town has grown up just in the few years I've been gone, and it's like a big town now. Like, it's really interesting. So, and you're having population fluxes, like, so places are starting to boom, and I don't know. And I think we're going to see even more of that. I think everything's going to kind of become even more similar instead of less, you know, like, I don't know. I miss the fact that there's not, like, culturally, like, things aren't more different. Like, because I want to go somewhere that's, like, feels completely different than where I've been, you know. But
I follow you.
I think coast-wise, I think if you, like, look now, it's pretty similar.
Yeah.
But